My name is Ellen O'Gorman, and my research is on the historian Tacitus. If you haven't heard of Tacitus before, you'll see the main details of his life and work on this slide. The image is not an ancient portrait, it's one of the 19th century statues of Greek and Roman historians, which stand at the entrance to the Austrian Parliament in Vienna. The idea is to remind politicians of their responsibility to history. But as you can see, Tacitus is also himself a politician, a Roman senator and consul, and his political insights are my subject today. In particular, Tacitus has given us the concept of secrets of state, which was enormously influential in early modern Europe and is still relevant today, as you can see from the book by Lawrence Quill, pictured on the slide. The term secrets of state implies, as Mark Neocleus observes, that the state has interests of its own and indeed maintains itself by keeping its own citizens in the dark about the workings of power. There are many implications of this idea in the modern world, but for this lecture I want to go back to what Tacitus meant when he used this term. What does it tell us about imperial power in the 1st century CE? Let's start with Tacitus's first long historical work, the Histories, which started with the Civil War in 69 after the death of Nero. We don't have the complete histories, I've marked the missing parts in green, but we're pretty sure it ended with Domitian's assassination in 96. At the beginning of this work, Tacitus makes the following statement. The death of Nero, he says, had stirred up many different emotions because the secret of empire was now general knowledge. An emperor could be made in some other place than at Rome. The first thing you'll notice about Tacitus's revelation of the secret is how obscurely it's worded. It's almost as if he's revealed the secret only to cover it up again. So we have to decode Tacitus's meaning. Let's focus on the term alibi quam Romae, some other place than at Rome. Why is it significant to think about where an emperor comes to power? As we read further through Tacitus's account of the Civil War, it becomes clear to us that the other places he refers to are the military camps. This is where soldiers repudiate the existing ruler, back other claimants to the position, and sometimes declare their own commanders to be emperor. This was already clear to the people of Rome in the final years of Nero's reign, when Julius Vindex in Gaul rebelled against the emperor and tried to back an alternative ruler. The alternative ruler he tried to back was Galba, who was then declared emperor in Spain by his legion. Galba marched on Rome, but he was toppled during a coup in Rome itself. But that coup took place on the outskirts of the city, in the camp of the Praetorian Guard, who backed Otho. Meanwhile, the German legions supported Vitellius as emperor, and Vespasian, who founded the new Flavian dynasty, had the support of the Judean and Syrian armies, and later the Moesian, Dacian, and British legions, who joined his cause. So when Tacitus refers to some other place, he really means an emperor was made and maintained by a particular group of subjects, not the Senate, not the people, but the armies. Let's pause here for a moment and ask, was this really such a big secret before 69? If we look at the accession of Tiberius more than 50 years before, we see how carefully Tiberius secured his position with the armies, even while he was still vacillating in the Senate over precisely what role he would play in the empire. We can also see, going back to Augustus, and if you look at the coin on the slide there, the long association of Augustus with peace. This is a positive and oblique way of acknowledging that his power rests on his military strength, on the support of the army. And we can see this later with the way that Vespasian commemorates his accession. Every emperor has a dies imperii, a sort of official birthday as emperor. Vespasian had two choices of date, the 1st of July 69 when he was declared emperor in Alexandria, or the 21st of December 69, when he was formally awarded imperial power by the Senate. Vespasian chose the former date to commemorate every year, so every year his imperial birthday reminded everyone that he was made emperor in some place other than at Rome, and by the soldiers. Then why does Tacitus present this revelation of the secret of empire as such a destabilizing event? As we've seen, he says everyone was thrown into confusion when the secret became general knowledge. I think there are two reasons for this. The first has to do with the legitimacy of the emperor, not so much how he maintains power, but how his position seems natural and necessary. As we've seen from previous lectures, the succession of Julio-Claudian emperors relied on ideas of dynasty for part of their legitimacy. Even though a closer look immediately shows that imperial succession was never a smooth and simple process for any of the Julio-Claudians, nevertheless they were able to generate a fiction that power was legitimately passing from one descendant of Augustus to the next. So Nero's title that we see on this coin as Caesar Augustus is just one simple way that this sort of legitimacy is signalled. But Nero's death, Nero, the last descendant of Augustus, that ruptured this fiction because each new emperor in 69 had to find a new way of claiming legitimacy. They couldn't claim it through succession. And sometimes their claims could ring hollow, making it more difficult for people to believe in them. Now, we see glimpses of this in Tacitus's histories. For example, the Roman people and soldiers want to address Otho as Nero Otho, creating a connection with his former friend and former emperor. And we also see Otho's discomfort with this, that he doesn't want to cultivate that connection. Or we see how Vitellius, the Emperor Vitellius, takes on another title associated with the Julio-Claudians, Germanicus. And when he starts writing letters, signing himself Germanicus, his mother reacts to this by saying she had brought a Vitellius into the world, not a Germanicus. All the way through the histories, Tacitus is showing us how the Romans looked around for new fictions, new ideologies to legitimate their new emperors, and with varying success. What this illustrates is that the emperor needs more than just military power to maintain his position. People have to believe in him. The second reason why Rome was destabilized by learning the secret of imperial power was that it disturbed the balance of the emperor's engagement with different groups of subjects. By declaring that the support of the armies was what really made an emperor, the secret of power diminished the importance of the Senate and the people. And this opens up an interesting perspective. It's easy for us to say, well, if the emperor had the armies behind him, he didn't have to care about the Senate. He could just do what he liked. But time and again, imperial history shows us how most emperors worked very hard to keep the Senate on side and to cultivate the support of the people. In other words, it was in the emperor's interest to maintain a polite fiction in his dealings with the Senate and people, to mask the military power underpinning his position. We see this in Vespasian's approach to the Senate after the Civil War. Now, as I've already said, Vespasian commemorated his accession on the date that he was declared emperor by the soldiers. But he still wanted to maintain good relations with the Senate to facilitate his legitimacy as emperor. Tacitus tells us that his letters to the Senate, when they resumed meeting, were written in the tone of an emperor, citizen-like about himself, highly respectful of the state. Citizen-like is an important term. Vespasian signals that he is not going to be a tyrant or military dictator. Highly relieved, the Senate proceeds to grant Vespasian the consulship and all the powers previously held by Augustus, Tiberius, and Claudius. We have the inscription which records the Senate's decree. And we can see that it provides the legitimacy needed for a new ruler by connecting him with the good Julio-Claudian emperors, Augustus, Tiberius, and Claudius. The inscription never mentions Gaius, Caligula, or Nero. Here we see that whatever it was necessary for the deified Augustus or Tiberius or Claudius to do, it shall be permitted Imperator Caesar Vespasianus Augustus to do all these things. Instead of Vespasian taking the names of Caesar and Augustus through succession, he takes these names by law, by a decree of the Senate. And this also maintains the balance of the emperor's relations with the Senate, because the Senate gains enhanced prestige by being the body which awards powers to the emperor, and this inscription advertises that fact. So Tacitus's Secret of Empire affords us two insights on imperial power. The first is that the emperor doesn't just rely on brute power, he relies on legitimacy as well, and that may involve fictions which Romans more generally are prepared to believe in. The second insight is that emperors are usually prepared to put some effort into maintaining good relations with different sectors of subjects, not just the army, but also the people and the Senate. To explore this further, let's look more briefly at Tacitus's next reference to the Secret of Empire. Tacitus's second work, the Annals, went back in time and investigated the Julio-Claudian emperors from the accession of Tiberius to the death of Nero. Again, I've marked in green the missing parts of the work. The episode we're going to look at is from early in Tiberius's reign, 16 CE, when a dispute arose in Senate between the emperor and a senior senator called Asinius Gallus. It concerns the annual elections for the senior senatorial magistracies, the offices of praetor and consul. It's important to remember that this is only 2 years after a fundamental change in the election procedure. In the Republic, candidates put themselves forward for office, canvassed the people, and were voted in by the comitia, the full popular assembly. In 14 CE, Tiberius, following Augustus's advice in his will, transferred the voting to the Senate, and as emperor nominated some of the candidates each year. This new procedure transferred voting decisions away from the people and gave more authority to the Senate. At the same time, however, it allowed the emperor to give a steer in the choice of candidates and ensured that elections never went against the will of the ruler. So what happened 2 years later? Asinius Gallus proposed a further modification to elections. He suggested that the emperor should nominate all the candidates, and that he should do this not every year, but in 5-year blocks, so everyone knew well in advance when they would hold office. At first glance, this proposal looks like some sort of protest, as if Gallus were saying, well, elections are meaningless now, so let's get them all over with in one go. But that's not what Tacitus thinks is happening, as he says, there was no doubt that this proposal had a deeper aim and threatened the secrets of empire. Again, Tacitus is rather obscure about what secret is about to be uncovered, and historians are not entirely sure what the deeper implications are that he hints at. The most likely interpretation is that senators who already knew their positions were secured would be empowered to hold independent views in Senate for 5 years leading up to their term of office. In other words, the proposal exposes the emperor's control over which senators reach high office, and it exposes that control by offering the emperor more control over elections, or so it seems. Even though the political moves behind this dispute between Tiberius and Gallus are obscure, the episode does offer us further insight into the position of the Senate under the emperor. Historians have often wondered why Roman senators continue to compete for magistracies. Surely such positions are meaningless when an emperor is in charge of the really important decisions. And yet throughout the Principate we see senators energetically campaigning and glorying in their achievement of office, We also see that the emperor is right at the heart of all this energetic activity, encouraging senators, spurring them on, increasing the number of magisterial offices so that as many people as possible can achieve their ambitions. Historians have often concluded that being a senator and holding magisterial office is still important, not so much as a marker of political independence, but as a sign of social prestige. Tiberius may well have been worried about senators becoming too independent-minded if they were elected 5 years in advance. But he may also have been concerned that their engagement with the competition for prestige would be deflated if it wasn't pursued on an annual basis. Finally, now that we've looked at these two examples, we've seen that Tacitus's secrets are not really all that secret. We've also seen that he uses obscure language when pointing to these secrets. What is the significance of this? Partly this has to do with the way Tacitus sees the world in terms of appearances which conceal reality. His historical analysis is replete with examples of this, and he himself comments on this process when he talks about the scrutiny of things which seem trivial at first glance, from which great events often arise. So we can see that appearance and reality is for Tacitus a fundamental part of what you're doing when you're being a historian. I also think it has something to do with the nature of imperial power. As we've seen today, we can identify the material source of imperial power quite easily. I doubt if any of you listening to this lecture was surprised that military power supported the emperor's position. It hardly seems to be a big secret. But Tacitus's examples show us that this is not the full answer, and that imperial power also rests on non-material supports, like the fictions of legitimacy, even though such fictions seem very flimsy when compared with military force. But the actions of emperors and senators indicates that belief in these fictions is just as powerful as force. And I think the language of secrets helps to convey the way in which imperial power cannot be fully pinned down. As we know, the Principate did not have a written constitution, and many of the conventions which maintained an emperor in power started out as a response to one particular situation, and then became enshrined as precedent and tradition. And this is what Michael Peachin is talking about in the quotation on the slide, this kind of discourse of precedent and tradition, which serves in a very real way to construct legality and legitimacy and then to broadcast these constructions. So as he says, it's something significantly more complicated than established imperial might. So I think Tacitus's language of secrecy is pointing towards this diffuse, more fictive basis, non-material basis to imperial power. When he points to a secret which isn't really a secret, he invites us to explore further into this world of precedents and fictions and see what helps to support imperial power. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this lecture and enjoy the rest of the lecture series.